I think what I would advise the person sitting next to me, I think I would repeat advice that I got in business school from Professor Jack Gabbaro. This was advice that when we polled our classmates 2 decades after we graduated, what do you remember from business school? The most frequently mentioned thing was this piece of advice.
Good Monday morning. Have you ever wondered how successful and happy people got their starts? Every success story begins somewhere, often more humbly than you'd expect. I'm Leilani Brown, host of Your First Job, the podcast. Today, I'm thrilled to chat with Dolly Chugh, an award-winning social psychologist, NYU professor, and author. And yes, Dolly has literally written the book or two on social behavior, both inside and outside the workplace. You'll want to hear what she has to say about that, along with her advice on a special fund of money that you should always keep. We're excited for you to hear our conversation. But I'm just so excited that you're with us.
Yeah, me too, Lonnie. This is a dream. You were born to do this. I'm into it.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So I'm going to start off with where we are now, where we find ourselves now. And I just ask you to describe, if someone were to ask you, what do you do? How do you describe your work today?
Yeah. I describe myself as someone who uses the classroom and the written page and the podium to spark learning and spark learning communities. I'm grounded in the training I have as a social psychologist. So there's an evidence base to what I do, but ultimately I'm interested in helping people grow.
I think that's fantastic. Are you doing on any measure what you thought you would be doing when you first started?
No, gosh. No. And by first started, we mean like early
at any
21.
point. Yeah, sort of maybe post grad. Or even when you post grad, do you have a sense? Because I have your resume and background, but a lot of pivots and turns. But how is this different from what you imagined?
Right. So I have my college education was a liberal arts education. I double majored in psychology and economics. It was not pre-professional in any way. I didn't have a particular destination in mind. But the school I went to, there were companies that would come on campus and recruit, and business seemed sort of like an obvious place to go, both because they were coming to us and because my father worked in the business world. And so that's what I had the most exposure to. So I went through the on-campus recruiting process for mostly for investment banking, for some other industries as well, but investment, this was 1989 and 1990. I had summer jobs in banking, and full transparency, my father worked in banking, so he was very helpful in connecting me to people to get those summer jobs. And so my resume had a banking tilt to it. I knew on my first day at work at Morgan Stanley, which was my first full-time job, that was not going to be my long-term plan. But the good news is it was a 2-year program. It was like a really long summer internship. Right. So it was fine. That was sort of a transparent thing that this could be a short-term gig.
Yeah.
But I did feel like the corporate world seemed like a good fit for me. I kind of knew how to operate in it, and I liked the efficiency and the go. And so I had no inkling at that point that I had a future in academia. If we fast forward to where we are now, I ended up getting a PhD. I got a PhD in my early 30s. I think I started it at 33. So there was a whole 11 years of work in the corporate world, in which I also got an MBA. It had never, ever crossed my mind that I would land in a professor's office, that I would have a PhD. I had certainly fantasized about being an author, but I never viewed that as like a reality grounded goal. So nothing about where I am now was in the forecast.
And it's interesting because that all of those pivots and having capabilities and capacity beyond what we own imagine we
Mm,
imagine. And here you find yourself one of the most celebrated business school professors at
mm,
NYU, and I dare I say the world. I can say
mhm,
that as a fan,
mhm.
and also a two-time author with a third probably on the way if I know you well. And so that's just really not putting limitations on yourself. I do want to go back to knowing first days that
Mm.
the that investment bank was a place to start and learn, but not a staying place. What were some of the indicators, at least in your mind? And I would say even quiet whispers and thoughts that you had that this was not going to be the long term. I'm going to add one more caveat because
Yeah.
I think that some of us can get into these coveted roles, these hard
Mhm.
to win roles, and say,
Right.
"What are you talking about? You have so much
Right.
pressure to stay, make it work. This
Right.
is a great job." But what
Yeah.
were some of those hints that this was not going to be your final stop, but maybe just a first stop?
Yeah, absolutely. And that, that what you've described, that sometimes people refer to it as like golden handcuffs, whether it's the gold is the money or the prestige or your friends are all impressed. Um, I had the job everybody wanted at the time that everybody wanted it. And
Yeah.
I was I had the top performance rating. I had an offer to stay for a third year past the 2 years. I had an offer to come back after I completed my MBA. So the handcuffs were real and they were tight and I could feel them. But I think I knew partially because my father did work in that industry. He wasn't at the same company and it wasn't exactly the same, but I did have a sense of his lifestyle and how hard he worked. And
Mhm.
I could see that wasn't for me. I'm a very hard worker. And in those days, I worked probably 80-hour weeks on a regular basis. But for me, working 80 hours a week makes sense if it's filling some need that I have. It might be a passion, or it might be a problem in the world I'm trying to
Mhm.
solve, or it might be bills I'm trying to pay. None of those were sort of the motivator for me in that
Motivators for
moment.
you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I worked hard because I work hard for the sake of doing great work, but it wasn't like, oh, I worked in the leasing and project finance group in the investment banking division of Morgan Stanley. And, whether or not General Motors was able to cut their tax bill, which is, what I spent a lot of time on one of my deals, was not
Was
intrinsic
not a passion.
to me. No, it was not a passion to me. I was okay with them paying more taxes. I mean,
Yeah.
that wasn't my job to be okay with it, but in my
Right.
heart, it was.
But didn't keep you up at night.
No, it didn't.
if you were if you were giving some advice to maybe Dolly's peer at the time, the person who sat across in the other cubicle
Yeah,
along the way, who's in addition to all of the golden handcuffs, had the parents that were saying, "My daughter, my son is a first
yeah,
year analyst at Morgan,"
yeah.
how would you coach them around making a change or making a pivot? What advice would you have to Dolly or to that person at that time?
Meaning, like, if they wanted to pivot but were
If they
facing some
wanted to
pressures,
pivot,
yeah.
yes, and
Which, but
needed just a little push or some courage.
yeah, yeah. I mean, by the way, the people sitting in, we called them bullpens with four desks
Yeah.
in them. Uh, uh, the individual you're describing is my very dear friend, and he's a partner at Goldman Sachs now. And another person sitting in one of those cubicles was the son of the Chancellor of Germany at the time, Helmut Kohl's son. So it was,
They were where they needed to be.
yeah. I mean, they were
They were
getting
where
it
they wanted
done.
to be.
They were getting it done, and it's a good contrast. So I do want to address the thought experiment you've offered, but before I do that, I can contrast my I haven't asked his permission to use his name, so I won't, but my now dear friend, who was my bullpen mate at the time, he was intrinsically fired up about the work. Like,
Yeah.
yes, he liked the pay and prestige and still does, but he truly, like, loved thinking about it. I mean, it just really was exciting to him.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so I had a very clear, and he was 1 year behind me. So it was when he arrived, all like clear-eyed and excited, I was just like, what? And I'm training him, and he already knows more than I do because he just like learns about it in his spare time, kind of thing.
He's talking about it at bars and on
Totally, he's
Sundays and
so
everything.
into it. Like it was just it was really actually quite endearing to
Yeah.
see that someone could care so deeply. So it's not. So I'm not describing him. But if there was this other person sitting in a desk, like you said, who faced some external profiles. Listen, I was in a very privileged position. I had a job that a lot of people wanted that paid very, very well. Right out of college, if I was getting pressure, sometimes that pressure from family members is based off of real things. Like your parents understand the reality that you don't yet understand. I would go on to see friends laid off while I was at Morgan Stanley, and every job I've had since then, except for academia, I have watched people I know get laid off. I mean, it's very real.
Yes.
So I don't dismiss those external pressures and the reality checks that our family members can sometimes give us. That said, I think what I would advise the person sitting next to me, I think I would repeat advice that I got in business school from Professor Jack Gabaro. This was advice that when we polled our classmates 2 decades after we graduated, what do you remember from business school? The most frequently mentioned thing was this piece of advice. And it was save your go to hell money. And so that's what I would tell that individual. I'd say, get through a year if you can with your physical and mental health intact. Go to hell money is that whatever your financial circumstances are, you may have student debt, you may have loans, you may have bills, but where you have discretion to put aside some money that you can use when the time comes that you, for whatever reason, want to tell your employer to go to hell.
So important, no matter where you are on your career journey.
That's right. And a lot of people, the senior people, where they're making more money than they did when they were junior, actually have less go to hell money because they also have more bills and they've taken on more luxuries that now feel like necessities, or, there's just all sorts of ways in which we corner ourselves. If you can't, then let's get you out of here. Let's get you out today.
Right.
But if you feel like this stinks, but I'm okay, then I'd say at least get through the first year and collect that bonus check. If you can, get through the second year. But put that money away. Do not go blow it. You do not need a motorcycle. And,
for a lot of reasons.
For a lot of reasons.
Bank your bonus.
Your parents are right about the motorcycle.
About what you want. Exactly.
Exactly. Yeah. And then go figure it out. And, you're in a very privileged position in the sense that this is a 2-year program. So there's no awkwardness about openly exploring options. So you can, these are well-connected people you work with. You can openly discuss with them, and by the way, do a great job. Don't not be good at this because it's not, your future.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I wonder, because our careers are tracking sort of in the same time frame, what is the rub today with respect to intergenerational? Where do you think we are not quite getting along or getting each other, I would say? And I ask that question because I'm going to get to this idea of goodish people and how we show up. But I want to ask you that question first.
Sure. Well, I think one thing, because I now have the luxury of being around younger people pretty regularly. My students are MBAs. They typically have 4 to 7 years full-time work experience. So they might be in their late 20s or early 30s, sometimes even late 30s. So, you know, they're they used to be about 10 years younger than me. They're like 30 years younger than me.
Isn't it amazing when that happens?
In my head, we're still just a half generation or a quarter generation apart.
You don't know who Donna Summer is.
I know. Oh my God. The jokes I've made in class that have landed flat, the pop culture references. So I think because I have that luxury, and I'm not in a workplace where our work is interdependent, I actually feel I see the positives of this generation a little more easily than some of my peers who are in different circumstances or have less exposure. So let me give an example. You know, we hear people talk about this generation being soft or, you know, obsessed with work-life balance. To me, that is a sign of strength and advocacy and sustainability. We can look at our generation right now. We can look at the friends that haven't made it. We can look at the trauma, the corporate trauma a lot of people are carrying around. We can look at the hardening in some of us, that something isn't quite as open as it used to be. And the question is, did it have to be that way? And I think what this generation is in some ways trying to do is do great work in a sustainable way with their soul intact and their health and their, you know, mental health. And I respect that.
That's powerful and beautiful, really. If you think about it, it's sort of a way to reframe some of the frustrations. And I wonder too, if just a little part of us on this side are just a little bit jealous or a little bit envious.
Yes, I am.
Wish we could.
For real. Oh my God.
Yeah.
When
or
I hear,
or be able to reimagine our own histories.
Right.
That how different might it have been?
I mean, exactly. Like,
yeah.
The things we never would have dared.
Yes.
Or even thought. I mean, forget daring. Yeah. So no, I absolutely I'm secretly quite jealous. The other thing, and this I've been thinking a lot about this, and I can't decide if it's a little thing or a big thing. So I'll run it by you. I think when we were, so like we take that bullpen I described where there were 4 of us, right?
Right.
And because it was before digital email and things like that, most of communication either happened on the phone or, you know, someone talking in person. I learned a lot by eavesdropping. I would say like half of my learning was just eavesdropping on everyone else because you couldn't help it. And they were probably learning eavesdropping on me. Like, don't do what Dolly just did on that conference call. And we didn't have like rooms we could go to for meetings. Like, you just sat at your desk and you did it. And what's interesting is we were able to eavesdrop a lot on the workplace around us, but we had very little access to the broader world. We couldn't, like, you know, the equivalent of social media, you know, there was no eavesdropping on the world the way we can do now. I think the current generation has much less access to eavesdropping on the workplace and much more access to eavesdropping on the world.
Yes.
And that, I think, creates kind of some funny, like the learning potential is lowered, that you're just not soaking things up. You're not getting as much useful intel about how to handle things. At the same time, you're kind of sucked into the drama of the world. And like it creates this hypervigilance and this sense of threat all the time. And there's something about that feels like we're selling, you know, and I'm not trying to say everyone should be in person all the time. I'm not making that argument. I think the world is what it is in terms of digital, but that does feel like a cost to the current generation.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. The way that I look at it, I think the opportunity cost has been, and the loss has been collaboration.
Yeah.
And then I would say observation and picking up on social cues.
Yes.
And then the default to so much external fed to us through social media, for example. Not to say that I hate social media. I mean, I love it, I hate it.
Right, totally.
But it's so curated and served up to us that it's not natural and organic. It's not iterative either.
Yeah.
You're being told what to think about a thing.
Yeah,
And
totally.
I think that's a miss too. So I think you're right. And we are so that's just changed the dynamic. You also lose collaboration.
Yes.
And you lose grace, in my view, because we stop knowing each other and we're not in a position to trust and give each other the benefit of the doubt.
Right.
That's my non-scientific, non-social scientific
I like that
way to look at it. But I do think that is a missed opportunity for all of us.
Right.
For all of us.
So everyone, like we go to the generational, everyone's kind of dehumanizing everyone because we're just kind of getting this very flattened version of each other.
Right. And then you have this if then so, right? Oh, well, if she listens to this kind of music, or if she is following this page, this is who this person is.
Oh,
or if she's watching this news program, this is who they are.
Right.
And so I agree with you, and I think that those are also some opportunities that are missed and lost.
Yeah.
I want to talk about at least two things, because we have two very brilliant books here. And I'm not holding them up just because I went and got them really quickly. I've had them for a long time. You can see my Post-it notes here, right?
Well, you were a great source of insight and feedback.
I love these. I love these so much because they offer a level of grace. On the first one, I want to talk about goodish as opposed to good, because we live in the nuance, we live in the ambiguity, even though there are so many things that would have us be put into one category.
Yeah.
Going back to multi-generational and removing some of the other identity, and we could talk about identity too, but I do believe that age is the next dimension of diversity that we will be talking about in the next few years.
Yeah.
Because people will be working longer. We need people to work longer, and people need to work longer. What do you have any thoughts about age as the next diversity dimension, and how that relates to being goodish, so that we don't stereotype each other and say, oh, well, you're a Gen Zer and you're this way, and you're a Gen Xer and you're this way.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I have a colleague, Mike North, who's doing some wonderful research in this area. And I think he would very much agree with your forecast of what's coming in terms of our attention to issues around age and generation. What's interesting about the age category is that of all the sort of categories, it's the one where everyone is destined to go through different categories. And yet we sort of have these strong stereotypes of categories that we were both in, like younger people, as well as categories that, God willing, we will be in, being older than we are now. So there is something, and yet the stereotypes are really, really sticky. We have, like, human beings have evolved to do something that most animals can't do, which is mental time travel. I can think about the future. I can think about the past. That's unusual for an animal, but yet we really have a hard time sort of relating to our past self and future self, our younger self and our older self, which I think means we have a harder time relating to younger people younger than us now, and people older than us now. So it's that's sort of an intellectualization of it, but it's psychologically, it's a very fascinating problem that this should be the category we should have the easiest time with, and yet it's clear we don't.
I do want to ask you the first job questions for sure.
Sure.
And just ask you, and I'm going to ask this question of all of our guests: what was your first job, and what were the lessons that you think you learned that continue to serve you today? And I
Yeah.
will not dictate what you recall as the first job.
Oh, okay. Uh, well, I'm going to go then with in high school and college, I worked at a summer camp and I loved that job. Oh my gosh. I lived there. It was an overnight camp. I would live there for the summer, helping these kids of all ages, of multiple cultures. They would come from different countries as well. It was a tennis camp, and I was a tennis player, so I was an instructor. And I, to this day, say I would have done that job for free. Like I
Wow.
just loved it. And it was hard work. It was up at dawn, well past, the kids go to bed. There's all sorts of duties to take care of in the scorching heat all day. Um, Kids would be homesick, kids would be like, there'd be all sorts of things, kids would be sick. But it sort of seems like I should have realized then that I'm really kind of a sucker for growth. I just like being around opportunities for growth in myself and others. And so I really, really love that job. And I could also see that not all of my colleagues loved the job. Like it was clear
Mm,
that it was not everyone's sort of joy, that kind of work. So some of my colleagues very distinctly did not take the job seriously or were de-energized by it in a way that was
right.
different from me. So it was a
Yeah.
good indicator. I mean, maybe there's something, not that we should do our jobs for free, but when you experience something where you feel like, oh my gosh, like this seems like a scam that they're paying me to do this thing I would do for free. Don't tell them I love it. That feels like a good indicator of something where you might have some both skill and interest.
Yeah.
And I'm not in the category of like, do what you love. I mean, my colleague Scott Galloway, he talks about, get good at something and then you'll love it. And that's another extreme school of thought, I would say. Um, I'm in the school of thought though of what what happens for a lot of young people is they decide they love something because everybody else wants it.
Mm,
So there's a lack of self-awareness there that like uh, I guess I want to work in big tech because everybody wants to work in big tech, or I guess I
right.
want to work in private equity because everybody wants to work in private equity, and
Right.
and there's no sense of what that means for you. So
Yeah.
I'm all in on people, having the self-awareness to say, for whatever reason, my passion isn't going to pay the bills, or my passion is going to require me to compromise things in a way that I want to compromise, or it's not secure enough, or requires too much travel, or it compromises my family life, whatever it is. That self awareness, I think, is brilliant. Um, and a very good reason to go do something you don't necessarily love, but you can get good at. What I
Hmm.
don't think is a great strategy is you go do the thing you don't love, but you can get good at because everybody else wants it.
Right.
That's a very different reason to be there, and I think that kind of evaporates. And unfortunately, you can hit
Pretty quickly.
you can yeah.
Yeah. Pretty quickly. Very quickly. Well, what if you have a graduating class that's exiting, their semester? What advice do you give them as they're moving into their first jobs after business school in this case?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, one of the things I talk to students a lot about, I mean, it may or may not be their first job, though for many of them it is to view being a good boss as sacred work.
Mm,
To Because so many of them are talking about, I want to, impact, or I want to work for a nonprofit, or again, this passion. I have this passion, and and they're essentially saying they're in search of meaning and purpose. And what doesn't seem to be on the radar, and by the way, this is my next book because it was sort of it's born out of the elective I've taught for years and kind of the little like pep talk I give in the last class it's sort of morphing into my next book, that I feel like there's few jobs that have more impact on the day-to-day life of adults as their boss. And if you are a good boss who grows people and develops people and is humane and who helps people perform at levels they didn't think were possible, who can deliver real feedback in a compassionate way, if you're that kind of boss, you change lives.
You do.
You change lives intergenerationally. You change lives. You create ripple effects. You create other good bosses that are going to go on to be the
Right.
same
You
kind of boss
cultivate
for
the next
someone else.
generation of leadership.
That's right. And so when one's looking for meaning and purpose, I think the track that many people are already on is going to offer that. It's really invest in being a good boss. Yeah. Not because you should, but because you want to, because it's going to give you as much as it's going to give the people you manage.
What are 2 to 3 signals of a good boss in your opinion?
I mean, first and foremost, do they treat humans like humans? Do they treat employees like human beings or not? And so that's, and we've all had bosses like this, when you tell someone you're going through something, you need to be somewhere, you need to take care of a loved one. How do they react in that moment? We never forget those moments, right? The boss that didn't respect that moment of crisis. So first and foremost, these are human beings you're dealing with. Secondly, that helping everyone around you find their why at work. Not every job is changing the world. Not every job is going to be super interesting every day, but there can still be a why that can be meaningful, and it can connect to the work of the organization. It can connect to a skill the individual is passionate about developing. It can connect to a network. It can connect to visibility that you're getting. It can connect to the money. But really understanding the why of the people who work for you and working hard to ensure that why is met.
And I'm going to probably jump ahead and just imagine that there is an ending that says that bosses in companies or CEOs that run companies with those at least 2 things in mind can tie that to productivity and profitability.
Absolutely. Right.
So I mean, where your data is going to point to.
I'm actually not even going to spend, let me see what my editor says, but I don't feel the need to build that case very strongly because I think that's out there.
Yeah.
I think it's clear that if you can retain the best people, you're going to be more productive and, have a better bottom line and more competitive in the marketplace. But I think what I'm sort of fascinated by is the joys and legacies of doing this. And I just don't think, I remember when I was pregnant with my first child and I was talking to a colleague who already had maybe a toddler at the time. And he said to me, you know what no one tells you about being a parent? And I was like, oh my gosh, here comes another nightmare story about the sleepless nights. And, I was hearing so much of that. And what he said, what nobody tells you is it's fun. It's fun.
It is fun.
And I was like, and I mean, not that every day is fun, but it was like, you're right. No one is telling me that. Everyone's telling me, it's going to change your life. It's going to be so hard.
You're going to lose a lot of sleep.
All of which was true. I mean, both things can be true, but I think there's a little bit of this going on with being a boss that we're not hearing enough about what good bosses get out of being good bosses.
Right. And the opportunity and the responsibility
and
to be a good boss.
Exactly.
And what that could mean.
Yeah. That we all love that warm glow of helping someone grow. I mean, we all chase that. That's the job.
And it's so unfortunately spoken of so rarely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. So that's
parodied.
Say it again.
it's parodied. Bad bosses are parodied. They're in movies, they're
Oh,
in memes and
oh my
everything.
gosh. Yes. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And in fact, it's
Yeah.
funny because when I tell people like the course I teach, what do you teach? I teach a course on how to be a good boss. It's funny that people's reaction 9 times out of 10 is to tell me about a bad boss. Like it's very
Absolutely.
rare that they have like their minds immediately go to the bad boss. And in class, it's funny because, the way I teach the course is I'm bringing kind of best practices and science, but interweaving it with the experiences of my students. So they're doing a lot of the storytelling that we're going to put together. So sometimes I'll ask for examples. And so I can always tell who has a good boss example to share because they'll have one of two forms of nonverbals. They'll either kind of be like this because they're like embarrassed that everyone around them is telling these like
As a
nightmare
war
stories.
story.
Yeah. And they almost feel like, I feel bad, but I actually have a good story. They'll either be that or they'll be like, you gotta call on me. Like they will be jumping out of their seat to tell you about this person who changed their life or who
Yeah,
helped them, who they would walk through fire for.
absolutely.
So the good boss stories do seem to be the small
In the
minority.
minority, yeah.
Yeah.
As most stories, sort of would go. But I would say that to your point, your original point about it changing lives, it really does. It
Mhm.
makes or breaks your experience,
Yeah.
whether you want to continue. It affects your comp. It affects your trajectory. It affects your mental health,
Yes.
everything, everything,
Everything.
and that of your
Everything.
family.
Absolutely. Everything you just listed of your family as well, and your dog.
Yeah.
Like it,
Yes.
it, it
Your
affects
dog, your
everything.
cat, your fish, your your diet.
Yes. Yes.
Oh my goodness. Dolly, I could talk to you forever. I won't keep you forever, but I will ask you, what is your greatest aspiration for this next generation of workforce as they enter?
I gotta find a way to think about this and articulate it, but my heart's been breaking at like the way. Okay, layoffs. I'm a capitalist. I get it. Layoffs will happen, but the way people are being laid off, the
Mm,
just this that you just can't log into your email and that's how you find out kind of layoffs.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
um, the, there is a real shredding of trust. And I will be honest, at first, like I hear all the time from students, like they've accepted a job offer, they've literally accepted a written job offer, they've negotiated it, the company's waiting for them, and then they're still job hunting before they've started on the first day.
Mm.
Or they go get another offer and they renege on the first one. Now, I remember in our generation, reneging on a job offer was such a big deal. Like
Mm-hmm.
the instances I can remember where people in my world had to do it, it was agony. It was hours of torment of what to do, and there was some extreme circumstance. Now it happens all the time. And at first, I had a very generational response to it of, how dare you job hunt after you've accepted a job
Right.
offer?
You've made a commitment.
You've
They're
made a
expecting you tomorrow.
commitment,
Yeah.
and someone else didn't get that job because you accepted it. Like I had
Mm-hmm.
a very holier than thou response to this. But what I've started to see is companies will renege those offers as well. They
Mm-hmm.
are really people cannot depend on companies for anything anymore.
Oh,
And
yeah.
the psychological contract has been broken. And I'm sure there's exceptions, and I'm sure your listeners will let you know the ways in which I've missed the exceptions. But I would say
Yes. No,
by and
please tell
large,
me the exceptions, listeners,
well, I
on
don't I
both
don't know that
sides.
I know them, but I'm
No, I
saying, yeah.
know. I
Oh,
know
you're
what you're
telling your
saying.
listeners, yes, 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 please do.
Weigh
Um,
in and let us know.
but I think by and large, and the truth is that if you are someone who works for low wages, minimum wage. This has probably always been true about how you've been treated. And now I think it's true across the workforce at higher income jobs as well. And so this is a long way of answering your question of, I think what I would wish for them is for them to have some trust in the market. I understand why they don't. So I don't know where that trust is going to come from, though.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I think I'm hearing you, and they're opening space for humanity to re-enter on both sides.
On both sides.
Trust and humanity and courtesy to re-enter on both sides, I think would be so amazing. So what's next for you? The book is coming.
I'm just starting it. I'm just starting it. So I'm literally having my first, I've signed a book deal with Simon & Schuster, first meeting with the editors this week.
Congratulations.
So thank you. So that's a couple of years off, I guess. But yeah, I'm at NYU Stern School of Business. I'm taking on a new role with something we call Leadership Accelerator. It's these immersion simulation experiences into leadership.
Wonderful.
So rather than reading about it or talking about it or analyzing it, it's you walk in a room having no idea what's going to happen, and we actually hire actors to come in and like confront you with different situations.
That's exciting.
It's really exciting. So a colleague of mine has built it over the last 5 years, and now I get the easier job of continuing their great work. I'm going to be teaching in our New York University prison education program, which I've done in the past. I'll be doing that this fall as well, teaching a leadership class. So, and then continuing my MBA classroom teaching as well.
I think that's fantastic. And also, just so that I make sure that people get it right, they can sign up for Dear Good People, the monthly newsletter, which I really enjoy, and they can sign up at dollychugh.com/newsletter.
Absolutely. That's it. And I was at a conference this weekend, and someone I don't know came up to me and said, "You are a dash of joy in my inbox."
Oh, that's a good thing.
A nice testimonial.
A really nice compliment. Yes, a very high compliment. Well, we will amplify that and so much more. Dolly, thank you so much for being with us.
Your First Job is a production of Giant Steps, LLC, a company working at the intersection of strategy, culture, career, and education. I'm Leilani Brown, CEO and host of the show. Many thanks to our executive producer, Sam Osborne, our production team at Relics Corps, and to Maxwell Brown for composing and producing our show music. You can learn more about our company and the podcast by visiting giantstepsllc.com. Thank you for listening.